Hello everyone, and welcome to this East Anglian Air Ambulance Insight event with our new Chief Executive, Matthew Jones. We're broadcasting live to you from the Suffolk room of Helimed House, which is our new and improved 24/7 operating base here at Norwich Airport. As Director of Operations, Matthew was responsible for delivering the capital build to create this new headquarters. So I know I'm looking forward to hearing more about the various challenges of doing that in a pandemic, no less. But before we get started, there are a few housekeeping notes to mention. Unfortunately, we can't see or hear you. If you'd like to interact with us and send any questions over to Matthew, please use the chat box. If you drop out for any reason, you can use the link that was sent to you to get back in. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties of any sort, the number to call Holly should be popping up in the chat box as I speak. So, and if you do miss anything for any reason, we will be sending the recording out later, so you can always catch up when you get some spare time later on. So for those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Conor McGeown, and I'm the Head of Development here at East Anglian Air Ambulance. And I'm delighted to welcome you all here today for this event. Thank you all for joining us. And I'm also delighted to introduce Matthew. It's not entirely true to say that Matthew's been operating behind the scenes for the last few years, but in his new capacity as Chief Executive, he'll be much more in the spotlight than he was previously. So I hope you enjoyed this opportunity to get to know him a little better. And so as Director of Operations, he's I'd say arguably he's overseen the development of the operation during its most intense period, from the introduction of the UK's first Airbus H145s in 2015, all the way to the realization of the charity's long-standing ambition to become 24/7 by both road and by air earlier this summer. So Matthew is a jack of many trades, which you'll hear about later. And he brings a wealth of, he's a jack of many trades, but I'd say a chartered surveyor by profession. And he brings a wealth of project management experience to the charity, along with a tremendous eye for detail, cool, calm and collected demeanor, and most importantly, excellent coffee making skills. So, we're just delighted to have him here today. Following Patrick Peel is no easy task. But I think I speak for all of us in the charity when I say that we're delighted to have him in the hot seat. So welcome, Matthew, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Conor. Delighted to be here. Very kind of you to share this time.
Not a problem. I guess first of all, I think it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about your initial reaction upon hearing the news, I suppose, that you've been successful in your application.
Yeah, well, I suppose my initial reaction was, obviously completely delighted, very flattered, I have to say. Also very conscious, I guess, of the burden of responsibility, actually, of being asked to lead an organisation that I suppose is so close to so many people's hearts, that is so well supported, and actually that is now so important in the healthcare, emergency healthcare provision within this region. I felt extremely privileged, extremely flattered, but definitely a sort of sense of, my goodness, this is a big job, and it's a big responsibility, and I need to do it right. I suppose the other emotion, if I'm really honest, was relief, because there's something a little awkward about being interviewed by people who you know quite well. And if you're not successful, that can lead to some fairly awkward conversations afterwards. So I was relieved just on a very personal level that I'd been successful, but I was also relieved because I'd spoken to my executive team colleagues in the build-up to the interview. They knew that I was being interviewed for the role, and they'd been very supportive, and I knew were rooting for me. So. Also felt this sense of responsibility not to let them down, and to repay the trust and the confidence that they had in me. So Relieved and delighted. Okay. Yes, indeed.
I suppose as with your experience of running the operation, you had a very vivid sense of the, I guess, the intricacies and complexities of managing an organization like this as well.
Yes, I mean, I think that's one of the great benefits of having been here for well, it's approaching 7 years. In fact, I think actually I've just gone past my 7th anniversary of when I first got involved with the charity, if not as a member of staff. So, you know, yes, I knew a lot about the organisation. I certainly wasn't, you know, my knowledge was not in depth in all areas, but I knew a lot about the general direction. I knew a lot in detail about some aspects of it, but yeah, it's helpful to have that backdrop.
Excellent. So is it safe to say, I suppose, that you came to the charity in a rather roundabout fashion? You know, I suppose your career path to EAAA wasn't exactly the most straightforward one.
No.
Can you give us can you briefly summarise, I suppose, your trajectory to date?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to be brief really on this, because I suppose here I am at the age of 53, and you know, I've had a sort of over 30-year career, and as you say, it's had some twists and turns. So I always start, I think, just because it's relevant to a number of the jobs that I have done over the last 30 years. That I did a science degree, biological sciences. So in some senses that has helped where I've ended up, but by no means was it particularly relevant to the route I took. Upon leaving university, for some reason, and I look back and I don't really know why, it seemed a long time ago, and the thought processes aren't very clear to me now, but I decided that I wanted to be a chartered surveyor. And my first job was in a London firm of chartered surveyors, where I worked for 6 years, and I developed from being a trainee, again, who knew nothing about property because I had a science degree, to becoming a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and then specialised through those 6 years and became a surveyor in investment property. So for those who might not be that familiar with that world, that's effectively a bit like looking, advising, you know, I suppose it's the property equivalent of a stockbroker. Mm-hmm. So buying and selling property investments. So these were properties that were commercial use, so offices, retail, industrial, that were let to tenants and income producing, and you were buying and selling the freehold interest in these buildings to optimise the returns on a portfolio. So, and that was certainly the most intellectually challenging part of commercial property. So I did that for 6 years, and then I left London. I didn't want to live in London for the rest of my life, and I left London and went to Manchester to work for the Cooperative Wholesale Society, who at the time, and I don't know whether they still do, but they had a fairly large property portfolio which they held for the purpose of you know, bolstering their balance sheet and getting some income. So I looked after that portfolio for 3 years, and then during my time in Manchester, I married Alison, my wife, and she was just coming to the end of her GP training, and we kind of knew that she would need to be settled in a GP practice, mm-hmm. And that I also wanted to be settled in one place for us to bring up a family. Mm-hmm. And the problem with investment property is that really about 95% of it is done out of London. Mm-hmm. And if you wanted a career where you had a bit of variety and you could possibly move around a little bit but stay in one place, and you didn't want to live in London, that was going to be quite tricky. So I went and studied for a full-time MBA, which the purpose of which was to broaden my horizons, frankly. And it did indeed achieve that, because I was fortunate. So I went for a year at Cranfield School of Management, got my Masters of Business Administration, and off the back of that, immediately afterwards, the job market was quite strong. Mm-hmm. So I ended up accepting a job with Group Lotus Cars, I guess is the more familiar name, in Norfolk, mm-hmm. In sort of late 2000. Wonderful. And I knew something about Norfolk. I knew that it would be a great place to raise a family. Mm-hmm. And Alison was keen on that idea. It was closer to her childhood home as well. She was brought up in Lincolnshire, and so we went for it, and I spent a really interesting 10 years at Lotus, and I say that with a smile on my face. Not the most stable of companies, and to actually have done 10 years, I think is quite remarkable, really, in retrospect. I think there were 6 redundancy programs during that time, so I guess I did quite well to survive. But in many ways, it was kind of an ideal post-MBA company to work for, because I just did such a variety of things.
Yes.
I worked in manufacturing, I worked in operations, I worked in on the financial side of things. I became an exec assistant to the manufacturing director, and then the MD of the cars business, and then ultimately the chief executive of the group. I led the sales and marketing function for a while. I had exposure to the board, which was mostly Malaysian at the time, so trips out to Malaysia. And I did a spell at the end of 2 years in charge of strategy and corporate planning. So I had a really broad experience. And again, jack of all trades, I think. Probably.
Yeah.
I'll let you finish the phrase, Con. So that was really interesting and really exciting at times, but also quite stressful at times. A company that was under stress, that didn't have much money, and good luck to them now because they're in a better place. And then I left and went to become the Chief Operating Officer at Norwich Research Park. So you could say that I sort of went back towards property, because that was the fundamental asset that I was being asked to manage at NRP, as it's called. But it was also in conjunction with all the scientists and the science and the university, the hospital, and all the research institutes at the research park. I think fair to say had a requirement for a high degree of diplomacy.
Okay.
Trying to bring those institutions together, trying to bring those scientists to speak to each other, but also trying to attract business to the park. It was a really interesting 2 years. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about working with the public sector, working with universities and academics, and indeed with healthcare in the form of the hospital. Not the most comfortable of 2 years, but I certainly learned a lot from it. So yeah, really kind of twisty and turning career, yes, not obvious. It looks really weird on paper, so but it seems to have served me well.
No, there's not a straight line from, was it molecular botany to
yeah,
but
thanks for dropping that in, Conor. Yeah, that's what I specialised in. My degree is
yes.
Fairly niche. And actually, the closest I got to it was when I was at the research park, and I was working near the Sainsbury lab at the John Innes Centre.
You almost made it home, eh?
I almost made it home, and it did allow me to understand something about what they were talking about. So it did prove to be useful eventually.
Well, that's good. This is a little bit of an aside, but you mentioned that, you know, just because you mentioned that Alison hails from Lincolnshire.
Yeah.
I suppose a little known fact about yourself, that you were born in Canada, right?
I was born in Montreal, Canada. Yeah.
Montreal, Canada. Right. How long did you live there?
Just for 3 years. So I came back in 1971, 3 years. So I hadn't entered school, but my 2 sisters, who were both older than me, had both been in school for a little while, and they were bilingual because Montreal was, yes, you know, more French than English. So yeah, we were an odd family when we landed in Blackburn, Lancashire. You know, these odd kids who were speaking a different language, and yeah, it was a bit of a culture shock for them. But I don't remember a great deal about Canada, I have to say. But I still have entitlement to Canadian citizenship, so that's a little bit of a twist.
That might come in handy. So you mentioned obviously working at Lotus. Is that where you first met Patrick?
Yes. So when I was exec assistant to the chief executive knew Patrick from old. Patrick did some PR, specialised PR work for us. So that's when the first time I met Patrick. And actually then subsequently, I didn't talk about it earlier, but I spent about 9 months away from Lotus in the middle of my time there. Working for a startup company in the green tech sector, and then came back to Lotus. And during my time away, I had been looking after marketing and PR just prior to my departure. And during my time away, Patrick was asked to look after that department, and also to manage the project to launch a new car. So the Lotus Evora at the time, and I always feel very grateful to Patrick, particularly for that, because I came back in and was handed an oven-ready, project about 3 weeks before the launch of this new car that he'd, waved his magic wand over and managed all the way through, and we delivered a great launch for the new car. But it was all Patrick's work, and I just showed up, and you could say took the glory at the end, which felt a bit unfair. But so knew Patrick at that time, and then actually when I was at the research park, I employed Patrick and his PR agency to represent us on the PR side. So
okay, great.
Yeah, so our paths sort of intertwined a bit.
So I guess the two of you hit it off really from a professional and personal point of view at that stage.
Absolutely, yes, yeah, indeed. Yeah, we got to know each other, and there was, I guess we built some mutual respect, which was a good starting point.
Yes. Yeah. So I suppose by that time the air ambulance had been operating for over a decade, I suppose. So is that right on the timeline? So launched in 2000.
Yeah. So yes, I suppose when I met Patrick, it was about 9 or 10 years in. That's right. Yeah.
Were you familiar with his work at all at that time, or?
I have to say no, not really. I was familiar with the air ambulance. I suspect, like the rest of the public, I thought, well, this is something that's always existed, and I probably thought that it was funded by the NHS. I think I certainly didn't. I don't think I knew that it was charitably funded. Patrick, I think, mentioned it a couple of times because, of course, he was a trustee. So I remember him talking when I saw him when we were working at Norwich Research Park, that he was going to be observing on a night mission with the Cambridge aircraft. I do remember that, and I thought that's quite a big deal. Yeah. But I don't remember any detailed conversations about it. But I guess I'd woken up to the fact that he was a trustee, and that this was maybe a charity. But,
Okay. Yeah. And so you didn't go directly from Lotus to East Anglian Air Ambulance. You mentioned you went to the research park. So what were the circumstances by which you eventually came to EAAA?
Well, I'd left the research park. They'd had a restructure, and I'd been made redundant. My role was no longer required. So I was probably a month or two post redundancy, and looking around for jobs. And Patrick contacted me and said, we've got a bit of a capacity constraint internally. We need someone to look after a project to build a new base at Cambridge Airport, and asked if I was available to help on a sort of part-time consultancy basis. So I was very pleased to do so. Yeah.
So what stage was the charity at? Like, how would you kind of describe where it was in its evolution?
So obviously we have two aircraft. I think we'd started night flying, I think, a year or two before, out of Cambridge. At the time, Norwich was operating only 12 hours a day, Cambridge 17 hours by air. So
night flying, but not around the clock, right?
That's right, night flying, but not around the clock. We were operating out of very cramped accommodation at Cambridge Airport, so literally a couple of rooms. The contract had been signed with Babcock to acquire the H145, and indeed the first aircraft came in. So GMC, the aircraft at Cambridge, came in I think May the following year, so May 2015. I think we were tenants at Cambridge Airport. We were also tenants in Norwich and Hangaree, but we were also tenants of Babcock, our aircraft operator, which felt like a pretty uncomfortable situation to be in. So, I would think it had moved on, of course, enormously since it was founded in 2000. But compared to where we are today, it was not as far advanced. But we were employing doctors, and we were providing a full service. We're single pilot, I guess, on the EC135s, and of course we were looking forward to this move to go to multi-pilot with the new aircraft.
So I guess you were brought in to assist with the the Cambridge hangar.
Yeah.
And from then, you know, I suppose your tenure as director of operations has seen you get involved in quite a lot of really major projects. So the Cambridge base, you know, this new space, Helipad House, 24/7 operations. Well, you know, and we also built a new hangar at Cambridge beside the base just over the last year.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of the logistical challenges that you faced, I suppose, in delivering those projects?
Sure. So I suppose actually just winding back the clock, thinking about it, you know, I started, as I said, as a consultant really on the Cambridge base alone. It wasn't until April the following year that I became an interim director of operations due to a change in circumstances of the charity, and then subsequently got the permanent job. It's been an amazing 6 years, and really fulfilling and exciting because of the amount of progress that we've been able to make, and really, you know, only able to make that progress because of all the amazing support that we've had over many years, and indeed prudent policies of the trustees that put money aside for the big capital projects that we've been able to deliver in the last 6 years. So, the challenges of all those projects were, I mean, they were all working towards going 24/7 by air.
Yes.
And there were many incremental steps that were required, and there were many facilities and bits of infrastructure that were required to enable that. And I guess all the things that you've mentioned were parts of that jigsaw. You know, if I wind the clock back to when I took on the role, you know, there's always in operations a necessity to keep the show on the road. That's kind of the core bit of operations, and operations has a habit of throwing all kinds of googlies at you almost on a daily basis, things that you don't expect. So there's always this constant tension between the work that you need to maintain the show on the road, make sure that you've got the clinicians, make sure that you've got the pilots, make sure that the aircraft's available, make sure that all the clinical equipment is, you know, serviced up to date, that you've got all the consumables, and that is, you know, a huge job that is, you know, throws up surprises all the time. And I have to say that, you know, I inherited a team that were brilliant at that, and that team has changed over the 6 years as people have moved on to other careers and progressed in their lives. But we've had, you know, a core of a brilliant team for a long time. So, you know, Richard, Andy, subsequently, you know, latterly Alan, but before him Jerry on the aviation side, a great ops admin team now led by Holly, all putting their shoulder to the wheel and making sure that that day-to-day operation is working all the time. So what I think that allowed me to do was to concentrate on the bigger projects and the longer term planning and say, okay, what do we need to get from where we are today to this ultimate 24/7 objective and ambition. And then, you know, the Cambridge base was the first step, and that was, you know, really out of there was no alternative. We were operating out of rooms that were absolutely tiny. If you saw the rooms today compared to what we have at Cambridge or at Norwich, you'd be, you know, amazed that we were able to operate. And indeed, I think, you know, to be compliant with regulators such as the CQC and the CAA, we needed to move on. So there was those considerations. The big projects, you know, they were a long time in the making, and they're complicated. So, you know, Helipad House, for example, you know, had a couple of false starts, but started with, you know, quite a big scoping exercise to say, okay, how do we achieve what we want to achieve? We wanted to own our building, we wanted to be in control of it for the long term. We felt that was a good use of the charity's money to secure our future. And we could have been anywhere. So we had to look at where we wanted to be. We did come back to the fact that we needed to be at Norwich Airport, and we were going to be on the other side of the airport, and then that fell through. And then ultimately we ended up redeveloping Hangar E and staying exactly where we were, but that was largely due to a change in policy at the airport, who decided they were willing to grant us a very long lease. so that we could invest in a property that would serve our needs. You know, lots of moving parts because they were all moving towards the 24/7 objective. I suppose it was kind of inevitable that they all started to dovetail and all come to fruition all at the same time. So I have to say the last 2 or so years have been extremely busy. So you mentioned the aviation contract. Well,
you didn't mention the aviation.
Oh, didn't you?
I didn't say it, but
okay. Well, maybe. Well, I'll put words into your mouth. So you know, that was a big piece of work that took over 2 years of discussions and negotiations to bring to fruition.
In a way, that piece of work has, you know, it's almost you know, sort of slipped into the background, you know, because of the sort of the high profile nature of a new base, you know, 24/7 flying. But yeah, negotiating a new aviation contract was a massive project, as I understand it.
Huge, and you know, Alan led on that project, and I supported, you know, from an exec team type position. We also had 2 great pro bono advisors externally, Mira Seeker and Tom Budget. But that was, you know, hundreds of hours of discussions, negotiations, analysis, legal drafting, etc. So that's, you know, that's time consuming, and that has to dovetail with all the considerations that you're trying to future-proof the operation. You're trying to make it as safe as possible. You're trying to make sure that you're achieving value for money, that you're protecting for the future. You know, it's a big piece of work, and you know, the fact that the contract is 150 pages long, I think speaks volumes of just how complicated that subject is. And Helimed House, as I said, is, you know, that was a long project. You know, there's all the planning considerations. There was the lease negotiation, so the 150-year lease that we negotiated, and that was you know, complicated as well, and you have to negotiate a development agreement as well, and we had various options as well. So and then there's the actual process of designing, getting planning permission, procuring the contractors and delivering the project. And you know, none of that is possible. I may have led these projects, but none of these things are possible without loads of support internally and externally. You know, the design, for example, was very much a whole charity type exercise. You know, we got everybody's view, and we had a number of iterations, and we shared those iterations, and we tried to accommodate as many of people's requests as possible. And we had a great professional team behind us who were, you know, just consummate professionals. You know, so the project managers, the quantity surveyors, the mechanical and electrical consultants, the structural engineers, all working brilliantly together to deliver what I hope will be a great home for the charity for many years to come. Yeah,
well, I think it will be. But just the way you even answer these questions, it does speak to, as I said earlier, your eye for detail, you know, and your sense of the big picture, I suppose, and all the various things that come together to make these things happen. So
well, that's kind of
real asset for us.
Well, thank you. You know, it's been a learning curve. All these things are. You know, when I started as director of operations, I do have to point out that I had no background in healthcare and I had no background in aviation. So I felt extremely fortunate to be appointed to that role, and you know, aware of the steep learning curve that I had to go through in order to justify that decision. So I'm very pleased that you know, Patrick and others had faith in me to do that, and you know, delighted where we've been able to get to over the last 6 years.
Well, hearing that it's a surprise to me, I suppose. You know, because when I started here, I guess one of the things that, you know, sort of was immediately obvious to me was the you know, your fine grasp, I suppose, of the all the particulars of the organization and all its moving parts. You know, so that, you know, it was almost like I was kind of shocked to hear that you didn't have a background in that stuff, and that you learned it on the job, really. You know. And,
yes. Well, maybe, you know, if you'd spoken to me 2 years later, 3 years, 2 or 3 years earlier, maybe you would have had a different impression. I don't know. You'd have to ask the likes of Richard and Landy to see whether they had confidence from the off.
Yeah, fair enough. So I guess the 24/7 project is interesting to me because, you know, obviously we've been, you know, it's been achieved now The crew are now operating 24/7. The helicopter is always outside, pretty much, weather permitting. And from this point of view, it's just interesting to look back at it and then think of the sort of those initial conversations and what kind of pieces that around and the groundwork that needed to be laid to do something like that. So I don't know if it's worth speaking a little bit about some of those initial conversations and thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, as you've alluded to, there's many constituents to that whole ambition. It sounds quite easy, doesn't it, on the face of it? We were already operating for 17 hours a day. What could be so hard? You're just adding another 7 hours a day to the operation.
Sure, it's just a bit of aviation fuel.
Yeah. Why are you making such a big thing of it, Matthew?
Yeah.
But there are many considerations, and certainly the infrastructure was a big barrier to achieving it. We knew that we needed better welfare accommodation, sleeping accommodation, and indeed training accommodation. So at the same time as just that ambition of operating for 24 hours a day by air, we also in parallel had all these ambitions for getting better and better and better at what we do clinically. And so really important parts of the base here, for example, are the training facilities, because before the clinicians were training, on a trolley in a dusty corner of the hangar, with some makeshift cupboards, and nowhere near enough real space to do things properly. So those kind of considerations are really important. There's all the policy and procedural stuff. So whilst Babcock are our not only our partners but our experts in aviation, fatigue management is a big thing when you're operating 24 hours a day. It's perhaps slightly ironic that we operated for a while 24 hours a day with our clinicians, responding by car when the aircraft wasn't available. And probably we didn't have such robust fatigue management processes in place, because probably culturally clinicians see that as part of their job. Yes. And do so almost as a matter of course. Yeah. Doesn't make it right that actually we weren't allowing for that properly. So I think the introduction of aviation and pilots into that sphere just was the right kick for us to take that whole matter more seriously and say, no, we need to take rest and accommodation and optimizing the how our clinicians and our pilots respond in the hours of the wee hours, as it were, of the night, and taking the risk out of that, making sure that we're safe, making sure we've got the right checks in place, and that people are, as much as they can be, fully rested, despite the obvious issues of body rhythms and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, many aspects to it, and really fascinating, fascinating. Yeah.
Well, I suppose that it's not a situation where the course is already charted, right? I mean, I guess in pre-hospital emergency medicine and the nature of the work we do, it's there will be these situations where almost you're pioneering in a way, right? So you're working these things out as you go. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And certainly at a personal level I was, and I think as an organisation we were. There's a lot of finding our path forwards. We pride ourselves in being at the forefront of pre-hospital medicine. If you're at the forefront, almost by definition, whatever you do to improve, and we're always striving to improve, you have to be, making new ground.
Yes.
And that by definition means that, people haven't been there before. So, that's quite hard to do.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you as well about some of the other ways in which you contribute to the charity. Little things like developing the 24/7 operation. We can put that to one side. But you also contribute, I suppose, through some of your hobbies and interests. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit about those.
Well, I think I'm quite fortunate. I have 2 or 3 hobbies that are really good for me. They sort of they distract me from work when I'm doing them, which I think is a really healthy aspect of life, to be able to switch off. So I do quite a lot of running, so I typically run between 20 and 30 miles a week, depending on what I'm training for, that's quite useful really, because you can also run to raise money for charities. So I ran a marathon in 2016, the world famous Connor Bungay marathon, Bungay Black Dog Marathon, as it's called. I think only 190 people ran it, so it was not London.
And the lead group?
No. I did that, and I have to confess, my story from that day is that it felt like a very long time when I was running, and a lot of it was on country roads completely by myself.
Yeah.
So it felt very much like I was training actually, rather than running a race. But I was a little tired and emotional at the end.
Okay.
And it just so happens that Dr. Jeremy Morgan was on duty for St John's Ambulance, wearing one of his many hats at the finishing line to help all those poor people who would be collapsing as they finished. And I was almost one of those people. And I do remember almost collapsing into his arms at the end in a rather emotional and tearful state. I think he was a bit shocked actually, despite all his years of experience in
probably one of the worst cases he's ever seen.
Well, I think it was emotionally anyway. I think I've never been so pleased to see Jeremy as I was at that time. That was that, and I was supposed to be running the London Marathon last year, 2020, but that was cancelled twice. Yeah. So I trained twice, as many other people did. And I decided when they offered various dates for postponement that I would postpone it for the longest possible time. So I'm now due to do it for East Anglian Air Ambulance in April 2023. So I'm going to have a bit of a break and then wind up again in 2023 and hopefully do that.
You did do the Chariots of Fire run in Cambridge, right?
Yeah, I did. That was great fun.
In slightly unusual circumstances.
Yeah, so the Chariots of Fire race, for those who don't know about it, is an annual event. It's been running for many years, and it's organised by a firm of solicitors in Cambridge. And just as I sit here, their name escapes me, which is very embarrassing. But anyway, it's been a great fundraiser for many charities, and we were the chosen charity this last year. So it was run in September, and it's a relay race, team of 6, running around back to the colleges. And it's great fun. There were 200 teams involved, fairly chaotic, in the actual race itself. Supremely well organised, but if you've got that many people running, it's quite chaotic. And our team, representing the air ambulance, decided to run in flight suits, carrying a defibrillator, because the money that we were going to be given as a result of that event, we were going to put into community CPR training in Cambridge. So we thought running with a defibrillator was the way to get the message across. Don't think any of us really realised just, they might be quite compact, but running with something that is equivalent to 3 bags of sugar and holding it is actually really quite hard work.
While you're wearing a pilot's jumpsuit, right? Yeah,
I was wearing a pilot's jumpsuit. So was Laura Bird, one of our patients, and the 4 other members of the team were all doctors. So they were wearing their clinicians' flight suits, and it was a hot day. It was quite hard work, but it was
one of those things that must have seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, and something that you can laugh about now. Yeah. No, it was great fun. Great fun. And then the other thing, I suppose, sorry, we're talking about me a lot, aren't we? Is singing. So I've sung in choirs ever since I was a wee chorister at the age of 8. I had a similar amount of hair then; it was just a different colour.
What colour was it?
Well, some would describe it as strawberry blonde. I think it was a little bit more ginger than that.
I know strawberry blonde.
Yeah.
It's a very common colour back home.
Yeah. So I've always sung all the way through school, university and then in places I've lived. So in Norwich, I've sung in the same chamber choir since I came here at the end of 2000. A choir called Viva Voce. And I'm delighted to say that they're singing again in the EAAA carol concerts. The 8th and the 16th of December. So a bit of a plug.
Very good. I was going to do that, but it's all done.
Is the 8th Norwich and the 16th Bury, or is it
the other way around?
Is it?
Yes.
So Bury St Edmunds first, is it?
8th of December at St Edmundsbury Cathedral, and the 16th for the Church of St Peter Mancroft
in central Norwich. Yeah.
So if you'd like to see Matthew in a slightly different capacity, please do come down. Tickets are available on the website. It'll be a good night.
I won't look quite as angelic as maybe I did as an 8-year-old choir boy, and I won't be wearing a cassock and ruff. But yeah, so that'll be good fun. That's always fun. So yeah, a couple of things that distract me out of work, and thankfully have also becoming useful as ways to raise funds for East Anglia Air Ambulance.
Brilliant. So I guess now we move on to your new role, I suppose, and so we've styled this conversation after the first 100 days, which we hear about with U.S. presidents. And so, usually I suppose the story of the first 100 days of a U.S. president is completely undoing all the work of the previous guy. I imagine it's a little different for yourself, but I wonder if you could sort of, maybe summarize your first couple of months in the role and how you've approached it.
Yeah. Well, as you say, this is not really like a presidential first 100 days. I'm certainly not in the business of dismantling things that Patrick did, because Patrick, built so many of the foundations of this charity and has handed it over to me in fantastically good health, both financially. Okay, we've been through a rough couple of years, but still it has stood up very well with the support of everybody out there, which is great, really great, and we're incredibly grateful for that. But also, in terms of the staff that I've inherited, I think the morale that I've inherited, so much of what is going on here is in a really good state. So my role was not to disrupt. I don't see any point in revolution because there isn't any need for it.
Yes.
It's about taking on his vision, moving it forwards, still improving relentlessly, and doing it within our means, but always sticking fast to our principles.
Yes.
Making good use of the money that our donors entrust to us, and making sure that we are very much always thinking about what we can do for the patient, how we can improve our care, how we can make sure that we are resilient, we're going to be available all times of day or night, how we can improve our availability, by working with others. So, for example, making sure that our network of hospital helipads throughout the region enable us to get in and out at night, because that's, a key enabler for us flying at night. We are much less effective if we don't have that network, and we're still improving that. Many things, but I've inherited, as I say, an organisation in good health, and my role is to maintain and then enhance it.
Yes.
Through probably incremental means. If you like, what we've been doing over the last 6 or 7 years under Patrick's great leadership is doing more and more. We've been doing it better and better as well, but the main thrust has been to extend our service.
Yes.
We're now 24 hours a day in both locations, so we've filled the 12 hours that we weren't operating in Norwich, and we filled the 7 hours that we weren't operating in Cambridge when I came on the scene. So, and we did it by a phased approach, but we were doing more and more. Now it's more about how do we do better and better.
Yes.
And it's maybe not quite so obvious. We have to use all the tools in the trade to work out how to improve what we do, and to be looking at the fine margins, and to be using all our data and our analytics and our audit and our research to, look at everything critically and say, okay, how do we do that better? How do we do something maybe different? How do we do something marginally better? How do we, change things? And that's, so, they're going to be, I think that the improvements are going to be harder won, probably. And they're going to take more intelligence, in the broader sense of that word, to get there. So I think that's, I know I've skipped on to the future rather than the last 2 months, but that's I think where we're going.
Well, I suppose one example of doing better and better did come online a few weeks after you took office.
Yeah.
So that with Blood on Board.
Yes.
So would that be an example of the type of service enhancement we might be looking at?
Absolutely.
Or is that like almost too dramatic? Or are we looking at sort of the small?
I think there may be ones. Mostly it will be quite small, incremental improvements. But some of them are actually quite revolutionary in their own sense. So if you dwell on the ultrasound scanners that we now use, the system of review and expert advice that we have behind that, the governance of it.
Would you like to expand a little bit on it, just to explain that?
Yeah, so we've adopted a new ultrasound scanner. Technology moves on. The new ones that were available were smaller, more compact than the ones that we were using before. Of course, the picture and the quality had improved. So this is a scanner called the Butterfly, and it's basically just a probe now with a lead. And of course, the mobile phone is the multi-use tool of our era. And you plug it into the mobile phone and you've got your image through an app on your phone. But the great advantage of that is that you can also potentially share that image in real time with someone at the end of the line who's in a remote location. We're not doing so much of that yet, but we have that possibility. But it does mean that we also in real time can upload images to a patient record. And we now have a system of on-call where we have a whole system of ultrasound experts, both doctors and paramedics, which I think is a bit of a first, reviewing the images and providing the feedback and guidance to the clinicians who are in the field on those images. So, that's a great example of how we move the service forward. It might not be entirely obvious from the outside or even from within, but technology will enable us to move forward on a lot of fronts, I think.
Yes. So we do often get new bits of equipment. So I guess it's quite common for new kit to come into the organization. But I think we don't really stop and think or appreciate enough how, like as you say, how transformative some of those things are.
Yeah.
Good the way it works. So.
Yeah, it is transformative. So I think we've got a fantastic bunch of very passionate clinicians who really believe in what they're doing and who really believe in trying to get better and better.
Yes.
And they're constantly coming up with ideas and ways to do that. So long may that continue.
Great.
Yeah.
So I have a question related to your new role that we received from one of our audience members, one Patrick P. Have you found anything about your new role so far that surprised you? So I don't know if that alludes to something he left in a cupboard somewhere, but
maybe I haven't opened enough cupboards. Surprised. Probably not, because I had some preparation for the role in the sense that there was a little bit of time between being told that I'd been successful. So there was a good handover period with Patrick. So he was he was very generous with his time and coached me and helped me in that transition. So maybe not surprised. I think probably more delighted really, because the kind of support that I've received from all members of staff and the executive team and the trustees has been fantastic. I've become more and more appreciative of just how great all the people are who work here, and that they're experts in their fields and how their advice is so valuable. So with them by my side, it feels the job feels a lot easier. I suppose you could say that it's quite a big change for me for the roles that I've been doing before. But again, I don't think there's been too many surprises. There's areas of the charity that I didn't know so well, and I'm beginning to learn much more about, particularly our fundraising activity, the way that we manage our relationships with such a large supporter base. the way that we run our lottery, which was, you know, something I just didn't know about before, and the way that we engage and attract people to support us. There's many things that I'm learning a lot about, but it's more a feeling of delight and confidence in everybody around me that is the overwhelming sense rather than surprise. Yeah.
Well, so who knows what it is. It's been
maybe Patrick can reveal what surprise I should have found.
But what would you say is the biggest difference? You talked a little bit about your new role and your previous role. So what would you say is the biggest difference between those two?
I think, I mean, it's pretty obvious, really. My previous role was largely internally focused.
Yes.
I was managing, you know, contracts of delivery. I was managing big projects, yes, with some external advisors, but largely they were internal projects that needed to be delivered. And my new role is more externally facing. So that's one of the big differences. You know, I'm spending more time engaging externally. A week doesn't go by without some sort of media interview. So hopefully I'm getting a bit better at that with more practice, or attending an event, you know, weekends and evenings, and that's great, and I'm really enjoying that aspect of it. I think the other thing is that, you know, I've always felt before that the scope of my role as Director of Operations was pretty wide, and now it's, you know, as broad as it can be. So I guess I'm learning to manage that bigger portfolio. I'm learning to take a bigger picture view, to be less interested in the real detail, more in the future, the big picture, but still keeping enough of an eye on everything to, you know, to not step on people's toes, but to make sure that everything's going in the right direction, and maybe, you know, nudging here and there if I feel that it's not. So it's a different skill set, and I'm very much in the early days, but I'm enjoying the challenges of the new role in that sense. You know, every day presents a slightly different set of circumstances and challenges, but you know, with the great team by my side, in the exec team, but also the guidance of the trustees, and the support of all the members of staff, I feel as if I'm very fortunate.
Okay. So you maybe talked a little bit about this, but I suppose maybe a final question might be, what do you see as the main challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for the air ambulance in this, you know, I guess in the medium and long term?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I would sort of start by saying that we're embarking on a strategic review. So, you know, whatever I say here is my personal views. When we hopefully get a new strategy and 5-year plan signed off next summer, everybody will have had a chance to contribute to it, and some of the challenges and opportunities that I have identified now will be joined, I'm sure, by others that other people have identified. But just from you know, without wanting to prejudge any of that outcome, I would say that challenges, I think, you know, I think the economic environment is uncertain. Who knows where things are going to go? You know, as I said, we've come through the pandemic so far remarkably well. We've been incredibly well supported. I don't think we should ever be complacent about that or take that for granted. I think there will be hard times ahead. You know, even in the news this morning, we know that inflation is coming along. We know that the cost of living is going up, that, you know, salaries might not keep pace with that, at least in the short term, and therefore people's ability to be able to support charities might be affected. So we need to be braced for that. I think the NHS is going through a lot of stress, and that inevitably may have an influence on us. You know, I think generally the stories of history tend to suggest that when the NHS is under stress and struggling, that, you know, and we know that there's one coming next year, there will be reorganisations and changes in the way that they do things, and that can have an implication on us. You know, we may end up playing a greater role in some aspects and a lesser role in others, who knows. So as an example might be, we might be doing more, you know, patient transfers between hospitals if hospitals become more specialised. So I think there's many moving parts in that bit, and I think there's quite a lot of challenges. So I think we'll grapple with those opportunities. I think we now have this 24-hour service. I think we could do more and more within that. So I hope that our tasking rate increases, particularly overnight, as we get more established in that area. I think that I've lost my train of thought. Opportunities wise, so yeah, I think we could do more on the prevention side. I think we are, we're trying to get our strategy together for resuscitation training.
Yes.
Be that to professionals or to the community, and I think we all know that the public plays a massive role in the chain of survival, particularly for cardiac arrest, and they have a vital link in that chain. So if we can get more people trained and find ways of partnering and delivering that, so that we can get to more people, that would be really great. I think there are more opportunities in our aftercare area. We're supporting something like 20 to 25% of our patients at the moment. So the 75% that we're not supporting. So and we know how important it is to people. So I think there's great scope for that. Yeah, there's a few. I'm conscious of time. But.
No, I mean that's fantastic, Matthew. So that's quite a lot to look forward to in the coming years, and who knows how long. So thank you for that. That's great. So that is about all we have time for. So I hope you've enjoyed coming along today and hearing what Matthew has to say and learning a bit more about his his journey here and his thoughts on where we might be heading next. As always, thank you so much for all your support. Do check out the website if you'd like to come and see Matthew perform at the Carl concerts in December. Once again, that's the 8th of December for St. Edmundsbury Cathedral, and the 16th for St. Peter Minecraft in Norwich.
I would just like to say, Connor, I will not be doing a solo. So, when you say perform as part of the choir. I just don't want to manage expectation wrong way.
Okay, fair enough. It's worth pointing that out. So, but yes, as always, thank you all for your support. You make it all happen. So it's very kind of you to spend some time with us this morning. And if you would like to come and see us at Helimed House and see behind the scenes of the new 24/7 operation, please do get in touch. You can contact myself or Holly. So hopefully you have our contact details and we'd be delighted to set that up. So thank you very much again and have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.